Today, we will learn and reflect on the Apostolic Exhortation by Pope Francis, Gaudete et Exsultate, or in English, On the Call to Holiness in Today's World, issued in 2018. The teaching by Pope Francis on abortion and social media that were embedded in this decree were controversial. But these issues were only part of the message. The main message is how we can live a godly life of holiness in the modern secular world, a modern world that often lacks compassion for the poor among us. We must not forget the namesake for Pope Francis, who is St. Francis of Assisi, whose entire ministry was based on extolling Lady Poverty and taking care of the lepers and the poor. At the end of our talk, we will discuss the sources used for this video, my blogs that cover the topic. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. In 2018, Pope Francis and the Vatican issued the official Apostolic Exhortation, Gaudete et Exsultate, or in English, On the Call to Holiness in Today's World. In the spirit of Vatican II, Pope Francis is not only addressing Catholics, he's also addressing the challenges all Christians face when living in the modern world. This is an official Vatican document, which means there's collegial support in the Vatican and the Catholic Church for the basic contents of this exhortation. Including in this exhortation are sections that caution against unwise use of social media, and also cautions against having only the issue of abortion define your Christian faith. And we have a video on abortion where we begin by examining the detailed teachings on abortion in the Catholic Catechism. Pope Francis cautions that, in essence, the right to life does not end at birth, that abortion is only one issue among many social justice issues. He warns that we should not be one-issue voters, but if Christians insist, then that one single issue should be social justice. We hope to entice the listener to read Pope Francis's Apostolic Exhortation for themselves by summarizing the main points of the entire document, of which his comments on abortion and social justice are but a small portion. And Pope Francis begins, Rejoice and be glad, from Matthew. Jesus tells those persecuted or humiliated for his sake to rejoice and be glad. The Lord asks everything of us, and in return he offers us true life, the happiness for which we were created. He wants us to be saints and not to settle for a bland and mediocre existence. The call to holiness is present in various ways from the very first pages of the Bible. We see it expressed in the Lord's word to Abraham, walk before me and be blameless. And we're encouraged in our call to tread in the path of holiness by the examples of the Old Testament patriarchs and the martyrs and saints of all Christian traditions, and by the kindness shown by our considerate neighbors and the kindness of ordinary believers. Pope Francis reminds us, this holiness to which the Lord calls you will grow through small gestures. As an example, a woman goes shopping. She meets a neighbor, they begin to speak, and the gossip starts. But then she says in her heart, No, I will not speak badly of anyone. This is a step forward in holiness. Later, at home, one of her children wants to talk to her about his hopes and dreams. And even though she's tired, she sits down and listens with patience and love. That's another small sacrifice that brings holiness. Later, she experiences some anxiety, but recalling the love of the Virgin Mary, she takes her rosary and prays with faith. Yet another path of holiness. Later still, she goes out into the street, encounters a poor person, and stops to say a kind word to him. One more step. As Christians, we must love our neighbor and love God truly in our heart. We must strike a spiritually healthy balance between the activity and the bustling busyness of Martha and the contemplation of Mary, as Pope Francis states. We need a spirit of holiness capable of filling both our solitude and our service, our personal life and our evangelizing efforts, so that every moment can be an expression of self-sacrificing love in the Lord's eyes. In this way, every minute of our lives can be a step along the path to growth in holiness. Do not be afraid of holiness. It will take away none of your energy, vitality, or joy. On the contrary, you will become what the Father had in mind when He created you, and you will be faithful to your deepest self. To depend on God sets us free from every form of enslavement and leads us to recognize our great dignity. We see this in St. Josephine Bakhita. Abducted and sold into slavery at the tender age of 7, she suffered much at the hands of cruel masters. But she came to understand the profound truth that God, and not man, is the true master of every human life. This experience became a great source of wisdom for this humble daughter of Africa. Pope Francis warns against two subtle enemies of holiness, the modern versions of the ancient heresies of Gnosticism and Pelagianism. The modern versions of Gnosticism can lead to an intellectual understanding of the faith without God and without flesh, a doctrine without mystery, promising falsely simplistic solutions to complex moral issues. And we've heard the many TED Talks that solve all of life's problems in 15-minute amusing talks, which are often more amusing than true. Pope Francis gives us another example. When St. Francis of Assisi saw that some of his disciples were engaged in teaching, he wanted to avoid the temptation to Gnosticism. He wrote to St. Anthony of Padua, "I am pleased that you teach sacred theology to the brothers, provided that you do not extinguish the spirit of prayer and devotion during study of this kind." Francis recognized the temptation to turn the Christian experience into a set of intellectual exercises that distance us from the freshness of the gospel. St. Bonaventure, his successor, on the other hand, pointed out that true Christian wisdom can never be separated from mercy towards our neighbor. The greatest possible wisdom is to share fruitfully what we have to give. Even as mercy is the companion of wisdom, avarice is its enemy. And there are activities, united to contemplation, that do not prevent the latter, but rather facilitate it, such as works of mercy and devotion. Pope Francis reminds us of these teachings of the Church to avoid Pelagianism, which falsely states that man can live a godly life by his own free will, unassisted by the Holy Spirit. The Church has repeatedly taught that we are justified not by our own works or efforts, but by the grace of the Lord, who always takes the initiative. The Fathers of the Church, even before St. Augustine, clearly expressed this fundamental belief. St. John Chrysostom said that God pours into us the very source of all his gifts. St. Basil the Great remarked that the faithful glory in God alone, for they realize that they lack true justice and are justified only through faith in Christ. In this document, Pope Francis also reviews the interplay between grace, faith, works, and justification, briefly discussing the ancient Second Synod of Orange, which did not endorse an extreme Augustinian stance on justification, and the Trent and Vatican II doctrines that are reflected in the Catechism. Now, our blog has more detailed quotes, but in brief, the Catholic Church teaches that we must cooperate with grace to lead a godly life. Salvation is never automatic for anyone, and we must choose salvation. Pope Francis also ponders the Beatitudes, and how the virtues championed by the Beatitudes can help us in facing the challenges the Church faces as it continues to confront the modern world and modern culture. What is holiness? Jesus explained holiness in the Beatitudes, and Pope Francis here discusses each of the Beatitudes, and how when we properly understand the Beatitudes, it should be unsettling. The word happy or blessed thus becomes a synonym for holy. It expresses the fact that those faithful to God and His Word, by their self-giving, gain true happiness. Blessed are the poor in spirit. The Gospel invites us to peer into the depths of our heart, to see where we find security in life. Usually the rich feel secure in their wealth, and think that if that wealth is threatened, the whole meaning of their earthly life can collapse, and we see this in the parable of the rich fool. Wealth ensures nothing. Indeed, once we think we are rich, we can become so self-satisfied that we leave no room for God's Word, for the love of our brothers and sisters, or for the enjoyment of the most important things in life. In this way, we miss out on the greatest treasure of all. That is why Jesus calls blessed those who are poor in spirit, those who have a poor heart, for there the Lord can enter with His perennial newness. Pope Francis's emphasis on showing compassion to the poor continues with the next beatitude, blessed be the meek. Meekness is yet another expression of the interior poverty of those who put their trust in God alone. Indeed, in the Bible, the same word usually refers both to the poor and to the meek. Pope Francis reflects on the message this beatitude proclaims to modern man in particular. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. The world tells us exactly the opposite. Entertainment, pleasure, diversion, and escape make for the good life. The worldly person ignores problems of sickness or sorrow in the family or all around him. He averts his gaze. The world has no desire to mourn. It would rather disregard painful situations, cover them up, or hide them. Much energy is expended on fleeing from situations of suffering in the belief that reality can be concealed, but the cross can never be absent. And a person who sees things as they truly are and sympathizes with pain and sorrow is capable of touching life's depths and finding authentic happiness. Again, Pope Francis shows how the next beatitude urges us towards compassion for the poor, which is blessed are those who are hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. True justice comes about in people's lives when they themselves are just in their decisions. It is expressed in their pursuit of justice for the poor and the weak. While it is true that the word justice can be a synonym for faithfulness to God's will in every aspect of our life, if we give the word too general a meaning, we forget that it is shown especially in justice towards those who are most vulnerable. Seek justice, correct oppression, defend the fatherless, and plead for the widow, Isaiah exhorts. And Pope Francis shows how the next beatitude urges us towards compassion for the poor, and that is, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Mercy has two aspects. It involves giving, helping and serving others, but it also includes forgiveness and understanding. Matthew sums it up in one golden rule: in everything do to others as you would have them do unto you. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Certainly there can be no love without works of love, but this beatitude reminds us that the Lord expects a commitment to our brothers and sisters that comes from the heart. And also, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. It is not easy to make this evangelical peace, which excludes nobody but embraces even those who are a bit odd, troublesome, or difficult, demanding, different, beaten down by life, or simply uninterested. This is hard work. This calls for great openness of mind and heart. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In living the gospel, we cannot expect that everything will be easy, for the thirst for power and worldly interest often stands in our way. Pope John Paul II noted that a society is alienated if its forms of social organization, production, and consumption make it more difficult to offer this gift of self and to establish this solidarity between people. In such a society, politics, mass communications, and economic, cultural, and even religious institutions become so entangled as to become an obstacle to authentic human and social development. As a result, the Beatitudes are not easy to live out, and any attempt to do so will be viewed negatively, regarded with suspicion, and met with ridicule. Now we're going to get into the controversial part of the Apostolic Exhortation, and this is subtitled, The Ideologies Striking at the Heart of the Gospel. And this is written as a personal exhortation from Pope Francis himself. And we will quote in full all the paragraphs from this section. And we begin. I, Pope Francis, regret that the ideologies lead us at times to two harmful errors. On the one hand, there's the errors of those Christians who separate these gospel demands from their personal relationship with the Lord, from their interior union with Him, from openness to His grace. Christianity thus becomes a sort of NGO or non-governmental organization, stripped of the luminous mysticism so evident in the lives of St. Francis of Assisi, St. Vincent de Paul, St. Teresa of Calcutta, and many other saints. For these great saints, mental prayer, the love of God, and the reading of the gospel in no way detracted from their passionate and effective commitment to their neighbors. Quite the opposite. Pope Francis continues, the other harmful ideological error is found in those who find suspect the social engagement of others, seeing it as superficial, worldly, secular, materialist, communist, or populist. Or they relativize it as if there were more important matters, or the only thing that counts is one particular ethical issue or cause that they themselves defend. And our defense of the innocent unborn, for example, needs to be clear, firm, and passionate, for at stake is the dignity of human life, which is always sacred and demands love for each person, regardless of his or her stage of development. It sounds like Pope Francis would not approve of calling Democrats communists just because they're Democrats. Pope Francis continues, equally sacred, however, are the lives of the poor, those already born, the destitute, the abandoned, the underprivileged, the vulnerable, infirm, and elderly who are exposed to covert euthanasia, the victims of human trafficking, new forms of slavery, and every form of rejection. We cannot uphold an ideal of holiness that would ignore injustice in a world where some rebel, spend with abandon, and live only for the latest consumer goods, even as others look on from afar, living their entire lives in abject poverty. Now we understand why Pope Francis preceded this discussion with a review of the Beatitudes, emphasizing the compassion we need to show to the poor. And Pope Francis continues, we often heard it said that with respect to relativism and the flaws of our present world, the situation of migrants, for example, is a lesser issue. Now some Catholics consider it a secondary issue compared to the grave bioethical questions. That a politician looking for votes might say such a thing is understandable, but not a Christian, from whom the only proper attitude is to stand in the shoes of those brothers and sisters of ours who risk their lives to offer a future to their children. Can we not realize that this is exactly what Jesus demands of us when he tells us that when we welcome the stranger, we welcome him? St. Benedict did so readily, and although it might have complicated the life of his monks, he ordered that all guests who knocked at the monastery door be welcomed like Christ with a gesture of veneration. The poor and the pilgrims were to be met with the greatest care and solicitude. And Rule 53 of St. Benedict, cited in the footnotes, includes this instruction regarding how we should treat the poor, the disadvantaged, and the immigrants, regardless of their technical legal status. In the reception of the poor and pilgrims, the greatest care and solicitude should be shown, because it is especially in them that Christ is received. For as far as the rich are concerned, the very fear which they inspire wins respect for them. And Pope Francis elaborates on the need for Christians to be compassionate to all immigrants. A similar approach is found in the Old Testament. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, because you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And this is not a notion invented by some pope or some momentary fad. In today's world, too, we are called to follow the path of spiritual wisdom proposed by the prophet Isaiah to show what is pleasing to God. Should you not share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover him and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn. Pope Francis also reminds us that in the Holy Scriptures, love and charity are one and the same. They are synonymous. You cannot love your neighbor and not show charity to your neighbor. Earlier, Pope Francis states we need to love our neighbor. And there is a hierarchy of virtues that bids us to seek what is essential. The primacy belongs to the theological virtues which have God as their object and motive. At the center of the virtues is charity. St. Paul says that what truly counts is faith working through love. We are called to make every effort to preserve charity. The one who loves another has fulfilled the law, for love is the fulfillment of the law. For the whole law is summed in one commandment: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Pope Francis then discusses how the life we live affects our worship of our God. We may think that we give glory to God only by our worship and prayer, or simply by following certain ethical norms. It is true that the primacy belongs to our relationship with God, but we cannot forget that the ultimate criterion on which our lives will be judged is what we have done for others. Prayer is most precious, for it nourishes a daily commitment to love. Our worship becomes pleasing to God when we devote ourselves to living generously and allow God's gift, granted in prayer, to be shown in our concern for our brothers and sisters. Pope Francis warns us both of the spiritual dangers of our consumer culture and the superficial social media culture. And he warns us of the spiritual dangers of twittering. Hedonism and consumerism can prove our downfall, for when we are obsessed with our own pleasure, we end up being all too concerned about ourselves and our rights and we feel a desperate need for free time to enjoy ourselves. We will find it hard to feel and show any real concern for those in need unless we are able to cultivate a certain simplicity of life, resisting the feverish demands of a consumer society, which leave us impoverished and unsatisfied, anxious to have it all now. Similarly, when we allow ourselves to be caught up in superficial information, instant communication, and virtual reality, we can waste precious time and become indifferent to the suffering flesh of our brothers and sisters. Yet, even amid this whirlwind of activity, the gospel continues to respond, offering us the promise of a different life, a healthier and happier life. And Section 4 teaches us how we can be holy in today's world, showing perseverance, patience, and meekness, with many references to Holy Scriptures, and we encourage you to read the section on your own. And Pope Francis warns us that social media too easily tempts us to the sin of slander, the sin of damaging the reputation of our neighbor. Christians too can be caught up in networks of verbal violence through the internet and various forms of digital communications. This next clause was really controversial because many thought, he's insulting us. Even in Catholic media, limits can be overstepped. Defamation and slander can become commonplace, and all ethical standards and respect for the good name of others can be abandoned. In other words, he's telling us that poor schmuck on the end of the internet line is a real person. Online we say things that can be said there that would be unacceptable in public discourse, and people look to compensate for their own discontent by lashing out at others. It is striking that at times, in claiming to uphold the other commandments, they completely ignore the 8th commandment, which forbids bearing false witness or lying or ruthlessly vilifying others. Here we see how the unguarded tongue, set on fire by hell, sets all things ablaze. And we must keep in mind that we are exhorted in the 8th commandment to protect the reputation of others. And that may mean that if you say things that are true but hurtful, well, that can be slander as well. So why is Pope Francis cautioning us against the Catholic media who defame, slander, and overstep their boundaries? We need to be aware of the clerical credentials of those who are part of the Catholic internet media, but, more importantly, we need to judge what we read on the internet against the standards of Christian decency. Does the author's message lead us to love our neighbor and our God? Does the author's message lead us to love the Church and her teachings, particularly the teachings of Vatican II and the post-Vatican II popes? Does what the author tells us support the Catholic teachings of social justice, as taught by Rerum Novarum and Vatican II in the Catholic Catechism? If the answer is no, well, if they can be a priest or a bishop or a cardinal, it doesn't matter. What they're doing is against God. When we do not show compassion for the poor, the sick, the elderly, the disadvantaged, the sojourner, the immigrant, the slave, the minimum wage worker, when we deny that Black lives matter, we are rejecting the Catholic teachings on social justice. When we reject the concept of social justice, when we do not seek to be compassionate to those who face suffering and difficulties in their less privileged lives, when we seek to blame the poor for their poverty, then we become judgmental, and we are not acting as Christians should act. And Pope Francis warns us, it is not good when we look down on others like heartless judges, lording it over them and always trying to teach them lessons. This is itself a subtle form of violence. St. John of the Cross proposed a different path. Always prefer to be taught by all, rather than to desire teaching even the least of all. And he added advice on how to keep the devil at bay. Rejoice in the good of others as if it were your own, and desire that they should be given precedence over you in all things. This you should do wholeheartedly. You will thereby overcome evil with good, banish the devil, and possess a happy heart. Try to practice this all the more with those who least attract you. Realize that if you do not train yourself in this way, you will not attain real charity or make any progress in it. And Pope Francis bids us to live a holy life with joy and a sense of humor, and with boldness and with passion, in community with our local church and with our fellow Christians, in constant prayer. Francis teaches us, like the prophet Jonah, we are constantly tempted to flee to a safe haven. You can have many names: individualism, spiritualism, living in a little world, addiction, intransigence, the rejection of new ideas and approaches, dogmatism, nostalgia, pessimism, hiding behind rules and regulations. We can resist leaving behind a familiar and easy way of doing things. Yet the challenges involved can be like the storm, the whale, the worm that dried up the gourd plant, or the wind and sun that burned Jonah's head. For us, as for him, they can serve to bring us back to the God of tenderness who invites us to set out ever anew on our journey. And in a footnote, Pope Francis recommends this prayer from St. Thomas More. Grant me, Lord, good digestion, and also something good to digest. Grant me a healthy body, and the necessary good humor to maintain it. Grant me a simple soul that knows how to treasure all that is good, and that doesn't frighten easily at the sight of evil, but rather finds the means to put things back in their place. Give me a soul that knows not boredom, grumbling, sighs and laments, nor excessive stress, because of that obstructing thing called I, or me, or myself. Grant me, O Lord, a sense of good humor. Allow me the grace to be able to take a joke and to discover in a life a bit of joy, and to be able to share it with others. And Pope Francis also references the Orthodox classic, The Way of the Pilgrim. And this pilgrim was a Russian pilgrim who wandered the Russian countryside, seeking the secret of ceaseless prayer. And the saint we have is an Orthodox saint, Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who was a saint in the woods of Alaska. And quoting from the pilgrim, I ask that we never regard prayerful silence as a form of escape and rejection of the world around us. The Russian pilgrim, who prayed constantly, says that such prayer did not separate him from what was happening all around him. Everyone was kind to me. It was as if everyone loved me. Not only did I feel happiness and consolation in my own soul, but the whole outside world seemed to me full of charm and delight. In the last section, Section 5, Pope Francis teaches us how we should wage spiritual combat with vigilance and discernment. Pope Francis warns us. We should not think of the devil as a myth, representation, a symbol, or a figure of speech or an idea. This mistake would lead us to let down our guard, to grow careless, and end up more vulnerable. The devil does not need to possess us. He poisons us with the venom of hatred, desolation, envy, and vice. When we let down our guard, he takes advantage of it to destroy our lives, our families, and our communities. Like a roaring lion, he prowls around looking for someone to devour. And whenever you read any of the modern publications of the Catholic Church, especially the Catholic Catechism and the decrees of Vatican II or any of the other documents, always be alert to the treasures buried in the footnotes. Gaudete Exsultate prominently references the address of Pope Benedict XVI when he addressed the conference of Aparecida, which in English means appeared, which was a conference of Latin American bishops in 2007. And it is clear that this conference reflects the compassion Pope Francis shows towards the poor. And Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, who would later become Pope Francis, chaired the committee that drafted the final document of this conference. And the America magazine wrote an excellent article on Pope Francis and his role in this important conference. Aparecida's message, do not forget the poor. Aparecida used a typical expression of the theological and pastoral tradition of Latin America, the preferential option for the poor and the marginalized. Aparecida proclaims, today we want to confirm and promote the option of preferential love for the poor. Concern for the poor is not optional. And Pope Benedict summarizes a primary Latin American theological reflection. The preferential option for the poor is implicit in the Christological faith in the God who became poor for us, to enrich us with his poverty. Latin American Catholicism has differed from European Catholicism because of its historical embrace of Liberation Theology, which has openly and controversially adopted communist ideals on the rights of the poor. Historically, both Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict were suspicious of the tenets of Liberation Theology because of their European struggles against the totalitarian communist regimes of Eastern Europe. And in consultation with the future Pope Francis, Pope Benedict included this paragraph in Section 4 of his Aparecida address to the Latin American bishops. The Marxist system, where it found its way into government, not only left a sad heritage of economic and ecological destruction, but also a painful oppression of souls. And we can see also the same thing happening in the West, where the distance between rich and poor is growing constantly, and giving rise to a worrying degradation of personal dignity through drugs, alcohol, and deceptive illusions of happiness. But in Aparecida, the future Pope Francis, with Pope Benedict, embraced a theology of concern for the plight of the poor. Pope Benedict also says this in the address: in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as in other regions, there has been notable progress towards democracy, although there are grounds for concern in the face of authoritarian forms of government and regimes wedded to certain ideologies that we thought had been superseded, and which do not correspond to the Christian vision of man and society as taught by the social doctrine of the Church. But on the other side of the coin, the liberal economy of some Latin American countries must take account of equity because of the ever-increasing sectors of society that find themselves oppressed by immense poverty or even despoiled of their own natural resources. The address also references the social justice teachings of the Catholic Church, starting with Rerum Novarum. Many scholars believe that these Catholic social teachings influenced the American progressives and the New Deal policies of FDR. And the best summary of the philosophy of the New Deal and post-World War II world order is the four freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. You do not really have freedom if you work hard for 40 hours or more a week and cannot earn enough to feed your family with dignity. Vatican II realized that authoritarian governments can never be long-term friends of the Church, that the modern Church needs to encourage democracy. The Church only hurts herself when she rejects a democratic party that is not overtly hostile to Christianity and upholds the Catholic teachings of social justice. There's no better way to end this video than with Pope Benedict's excellent prayer at Aparecida, pleading with God to stay with us in our strivings and struggles to live a truly godly life in our modern world, echoing the plea of the disciples on the road to Emmaus: stay with us, for it is towards evening, and the day is now far spent. Stay with us, Lord, keep us company, even though we have not always recognized you. Stay with us, because all around us the shadows are deepening, and you are the light. Discouragement is eating its way into our hearts. Make them burn with the certainty of Easter. We are tired of the journey, but you comfort us in the breaking of bread, so that we are able to proclaim to our brothers and sisters that you have truly risen and have entrusted us with the mission of being witnesses of your resurrection. Stay with us, Lord, when mists of doubt, weariness, or difficulty rise up around our Catholic faith. You are truth itself. You are the one who reveals the Father to us. Enlighten our minds with your word and help us to experience the beauty of believing in you. Remain in our families, enlighten them in our doubts, sustain them in their difficulties, console them in their sufferings and in their daily labors, when around them shadows build up which threaten their unity and their natural identity. You are life itself. Remain in our homes, so that our homes may continue to be nests where human life is generously born, where life is welcomed, loved and respected from conception to natural death. Remain, Lord, with those in our societies who are the most vulnerable. Remain with the poor and the lowly, with indigenous peoples and Afro-Americans, who have not always found space and support to express the richness of their culture and the wisdom of their identity. Remain, Lord, with our children and with our young people, who are the hope and the treasure of our continent. Protect them from the many snares that attack their innocence and their legitimate hopes. O Good Shepherd, remain with our elderly and with our sick. Strengthen them in all faith, so that they may be your disciples and missionaries. And now we'll discuss the sources from the video. All of the sources we quoted in today's video are on the web, and we have links to them in our slides and SlideShare, and if those links don't work, we also have links on our blog, and you can get those links from the YouTube description. Always a valuable source of Catholic teaching is the Catholic Catechism, and we have an introductory video on the Catechism that explores its history and what Cardinal Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, hoped to accomplish with the release of the Catholic Catechism, and this is also available on the web. The YouTube description links to the video script in our blog. Please support our channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking the like and subscribe buttons, and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, and please consider becoming a patron of our channel. And please click on the links for interesting videos on other topics that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul. Thank you.